Thank you, everybody. As you might have seen in the program, I am not John Martin. John, being a proud Brit, mysteriously pulled out after Australia thumped them in the Ashes overnight. Sorry, JJ. Okay, why are we here? Bit of a word salad on the screen at the moment. So ORTB 2.6, dynamic ad pods and video attributes. It's quite a lot to cover in this session. If I had a laser pointer and I didn't have the coordination of a toddler, I would point at video. That's probably the main overarching topic that we're talking about today. So I'm going to go through some broad definitions, just get everybody in this room on the same page. It's not going to be grateful, it's not going to be a particularly long presentation. The idea is let's get these definitions out of the way, let's get the panel on stage and have a decent conversation. That said, what is ORTB 2.6? Well, I mean, by the pure definition, it's the latest version of the Open Real-Time Bidding spec from IAB Tech Lab. What does that actually mean? It's an addition of objects and attributes being passed in the bid stream to give essentially a richer ad experience. That sounds awfully salesy. Richer ad experience as well as just efficiency in the bid stream. I think efficiency is going to be a big repeated topic of conversation here. It's got everything to do with sustainability, but also just, I mean, efficiency in itself is a good thing. So, I mean, for buyers, what does it mean? It means better control of ad delivery. Brand safe environment, you're getting more signals in the bid stream to tell you what kind of environment that you're bidding into. You know, is this safe for the brand that you're sending downstream? Less, bid request rejection, which is always a good thing. Again, sort of efficiency is going to be repeated constantly through this. Then more granular targeting. A position in the ad pod is something that will be passed by ORTB 2.6. A similar experience to linear. Another overarching theme that you'll see today is closing that gap between digital CTV advertising and linear broadcast advertising. And I think there's a great deal of scope into what you're buying in a linear space, and we're sort of closing those gaps on the digital side. What does it mean for publishers? So, again, replicating a TV-like selling experience. Even live events and fast channels, will benefit from this. Granular pricing controls. So, I think that's something that is something to be cautious about, which is allowing your content to be cherry-picked with all of these signals that you're sending downstream. I think granular control always sits in the hands of the publisher. That's where it begins, and so that's where that control is held. And it's not necessarily a case of cherry-picking, it's a case of classifying your inventory and charging a premium for those premium ad requests that go downstream. And then, as I said, this will be the third or fourth time I'm mentioning sustainability. I think that's the other sort of last benefit there. It's reduction in bandwidth costs. Sending a single pod request versus sending several bid requests and bid responses to construct a pod manually as it is done today. That's largely that's sort of what we're achieving and overcoming with ORTB 2.6. So, probably running before we're walking here, what is an ad pod? What are we even talking about? So ad podding's in use today. This is not a new concept that is coming from the advent of ORTB 2.6. Ad podding exists. The way that ad pods are constructed varies greatly, but it is there. It's traditionally constructed by the ad server on the publisher side. Each slot is a single request that gets sent downstream to the SSP or to the DSP, is bid upon, it sends back upstream, and a pod is constructed. And this is an example that you see here. Pre-roll pod of 3 individual ads, a mid-roll of 2 ads, and then a post-roll of 2 ads. The way it's currently set up today, it has its complications. So there's not a lot of depth into the signals that are sent when building a pod this way with individual bid requests and individual bid responses. The people responding to your bid requests are not going to really understand how to avoid back-to-back conflict, back-to-back being the multiple. Everybody's been online and seen a Sprite ad 6 times in a row. It doesn't make you more thirsty for Sprite, just makes you hate Sprite. So it's that sort of granularity, that depth, that is also going to, when you pre-fetch a pod of ads at the advent of a stream being triggered, there's less rejection of ads when your bidders know full well there's a conflict in this pod, or Sprite has already shown up to take part in this pod. Advertiser conflict, you don't want to run Sprite and Fanta together. I think that's Coke having sort of 2 bites of that apple. Maybe they want to distribute their message across multiple ad pods. And then brand safety, you want to make sure your ad is appearing next to content that is appropriate for that ad. So yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. So ORTB 2.6, how does it look differently? So these are 3 examples of sort of the ad pod structures that have, with all some degree of flexibility. So you have the structured ad pod, where the media owner predetermines what the slots in each ad pod is. In this example here, 330s sort of in a row. Then we have the dynamic, where there is a total time declared in the ad pod, and then it accepts bid responses from multiple demand sources, and then it constructs the pod. So it could be a collection of 10, 15, 30, if brave enough, maybe even just 190 chucked in there to sort of play. But and then the final being hybrid, not a real head scratcher as to what this is. It's a combination of the two. So you could have a flexible number of ad slots mixed together under a 60, and then a final 30. An example of that might be you dedicate that 30 to a programmatic guaranteed slot in your tech stack. And then I suppose, what is pod bidding, as is the title of this slide? It's bidding on a specific slot in the pod. So again, sort of bridging that linear experience with digital. The first and last slot in an ad pod is worth more than the middle in certain circumstances, and so it affords that ability of being priced correctly by the publisher, as well as bid upon correctly by the buyer. So, what's this all for? What's the key benefits? Outside of, again, this will be the 6th time I'm mentioning sustainability, outside of just we're sending a single pod request and getting a single pod response back instead of sending 8 requests to 8 SSPs and sort of constructing a pod that way, far more efficient. Bid stream partners might see up to 20% of their total bids just in a sort of generalization being rejected because of ad conflict, back-to-back, any sort of things like that. I think having a clear understanding of what you're bidding upon sort of smooths that out and reduces a lot of that. And then sort of solving for long-time pain points. Again, a lot of repetition here. Back-to-back management. It's spoken about at every event, spoken about in nearly every meeting I have. Ensuring creatives are suitable for the content they're appearing against, granular control of pricing, yield improvements. So again, you're not devaluing your product or not cherry-picking the best out of what you're sending downstream. It's more just make sure that you're labeling it and pricing it appropriately. And then lowering costs and latency. I think that's another thing as well. There's a great sustainability play here, but it's also just a user experience improvement. It's a quicker ad load experience. You're sending one request downstream to request a pod, it comes back, and it fires. So, sorry, I should have pre-warned you. Here comes the plug. So Pubmatic, Pubmatic is supporting ad pod requests from publishers. Again, like I said a few slides back, this is not a new concept. I think the difference is the way in which Pubmatic fits into the entire ecosystem. So right now we accept a full pod request from a publisher. We will break that up and send that downstream to the DSP and effectively be that layer that constructs it back up in the middle and then sends it back to the publisher. I think the long-term goal here is that it's an end-to-end pod request that we work with the various demand sources, making it far more efficient. And then, so as it says on that last bullet point there, this is make sure we're sending full bid requests to the DSP in the future. With that said, that is the end. And JJ, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Go and sit yourself down, Mr. Pers. Find yourself a working microphone, and can the other panelists please come and join us? Give them a round of applause. Now, don't forget to hold the button, wait for the green light, give it a tap, all of that, while you sit yourselves down. Thank you so much. Cass and Paul, steady chap. Let's all go here. So I'll ask the guys to introduce themselves once they're comfy with the mics. We want to cover a few topics here because it's interesting to see the protocols be updated. And the thing is, the way that Tech Lab are releasing them are a little more iterative, so you have to keep across the page. They used to do bigger, sort of, clunky the right word? No. Larger releases every, say, 9 months. And and do a big song and dance. They're now coming out quite iteratively with features that roll out quite lightly, and you have to just keep across what they're up to. And I think whilst the protocols were initially released last year, it's been really good to see the insights into the features and benefits as adoption has increased. So we'll touch upon the range of capabilities now with this panel. And now that you're all settled, I'll ask Paul and Cass to introduce yourselves, please.
Hi everyone. So Paul Luckett, Head of Ad Tech and Commercial Innovation for News Corp Australia. Been in the industry for 12 years now. Was on the IAB S&G Council for many years, and now on the Executive Tech Council as well.
Hello, I'm Cass Tan. I look after partnerships for Adobe Advertising. I was also around before the internet throughout my schooling, so have been around for many a year. Looking forward to having a chat with these guys up here.
You're a miracle of nature, Cass. And actually, Paul's underselling himself as ever. He used to be chair of our Standards and Guidelines Council, no less, and continues to constantly swap notes, which is one of the topics that will come up. But we're going to start with you, Cass. And I know we heard from Tim some of the benefits. I'd love to just hear it from your perspective, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a massive importance in adoption of 2.6. We probably haven't gone as far as what we'd have liked. Even from a year ago, I think we were talking about similar, this same place a year ago. But it comes down to the fact that, you know, we've had this lack of standardization in the industry for many a year when it comes to ad podding supply across connected TV and video as well. So, I mean, Tim touched on it. I think one of the most important benefits it allows is for the removal of ad duplication and competitive separation. And as I said, I've been around for a really long time. So I was around when we had back-to-backs and, you know, we were slugged with the same ad over and over again. We know that that creates not only a terrible user experience, it has a hugely negative impact on brand perception as well, and not to mention the advertising dollars that can result from that. So the features and the benefits that we're seeing, so that is buyers being able to target bids to certain ad spots, and media owners being able to, you know, have a CPM per second bid floor as opposed to a static CPM. It brings out a lot of flexibility for the industry, and I think it evolves how we, you know, buy and trade video and connected TV programmatically today. So one thing that we've done at Adobe Advertising, and it is a plug, but I promise it has a point, we've recently expanded our integration with Adobe Analytics to include connected TV for performance. And what that means is we're giving our customers the ability to link a TV ad exposure to on-site events or view-through conversions. And we've given them the tools to optimise to, you know, a bunch of different things, lowest cost per reach, ROAS goals if they have them. Now, let's introduce these new ad pod protocols where you're allowing buyers to target and bid on specific spots. Tim mentioned being able to charge more for first in ad break or the last slot. And all of a sudden, you've got this really compelling opportunity to prove the value of each ad slot, which helps buyers, it helps advertisers, and it helps the publishers with yield as well. And so, you know, we can see that the experience is moving towards that linear TV experience, but the expectation that we prove the value in these digital buys remains. So heaps more flexibility, which I think we need in the industry, and a better experience all round for the media owners, for the advertisers, and, you know, and ultimately for the users as well.
Yeah, and that's a combination we're looking for, right? That win-win of programmatic capabilities with the linear experience, and obviously that would improve the frequency control capabilities too, naturally.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to quickly flip back to Tim before asking you a question, Paul. So I know you mentioned the sustainability side of things, and I know it's fairly new, but we're starting to see some figures come out, mainly from people glugging rosé in France. Not jealous at all, but the Have you seen anything yet statistically in terms of sort of a percentage or anything that whilst you've been some early testing, or we know it's significant at least?
Ooh, a percentage off the top of my head. Thank you, JJ.
You don't have to, but just if it's meaningful enough, and it's something we can do as a follow-up.
We have. I mean, I don't think PubMatic is unique in sort of exploring responsible media or sustainability. And again, I'd be repeating, like in terms of the tactics we're taking, it's largely in line with what the last panel was talking about. To Rahila's point, the digital media industry has a carbon footprint comparable to that of the airline industry. It's something to get your head around. So outside of the points that were brought up in the last panel, ads.txt, sanitation, essentially getting as many signals as you can to make sure that there's more efficiency in the bid stream, the dismissal of bids is reduced. I think it sort of circles back to the topic we're talking about here, which ad podding, I think that's by percentage, I think between 10 to 20% in the early advent of what we've been doing with our broadcasters globally.
Okay.
Huge reduction in what we're seeing.
I think we will follow up with some guidelines, and we'll look for some case studies in relation from a broad reach of vendors and include it in that in the coming months, certainly before the next AdOps event, say. So that's something I've managed to commit to, just to give us some more work there, Gay. Sorry about that. Paul, we're back to the original plan in terms of another feature that's important, and I think will be interesting to dig into a little bit, is in and around impression counting. So what issues are the updated features in OpenRTB looking to resolve there in relation to impression?
Yeah, sure. So I think you can't have a career in AdOps without having dealt with a discrepancy, at least once. Having been here 12 years, I can tell you I'm having the same conversations about discrepancies that I was 12 years ago, as I'm sure you will agree with. So, always looking to standardize how those things are being passed around. I think we have a kind of colloquial understanding of what an impression is, right? It's when an ad is displayed. But there is varying technical definitions of what an impression or how an impression is counted. And as the kind of digital advertising ecosystem continues to expand across into new channels like digital out-of-home and things like that, that's just getting more complicated. So something like, every platform has its own kind of black box method of accounting an impression. Things like the MRC standards have obviously helped that quite a lot. But something like OpenRTB provides an open source method of kind of signaling when a impression should be counted rather. So while OpenRTB in the past has had some really awesome features and quite in-depth features around bid requests and bid responses, it hasn't really taken a stance on impression counting until now. So yeah, reducing discrepancies, helping with things like ad fraud is, I'd say kind of what we're trying to solve there. Yeah,
and it layers on top of, I remember the start to render recommendations that came out, and I think that became standardized within Google platform, for instance, as the cleaner way to measure an actual impression. So it's just aligning that with the protocols.
Yeah, and I think another one as well is around like impression expiration too. Around like, when a publisher serves an ad on a page and their ad server may count that impression like pretty quickly, but then, the third party ad server, it, may take a little bit more time for that impression to be counted on that side. And that's, one of those age-old reasons that you give back to your AdOps team around why there's usually a discrepancy between your buyers and your sellers.
That's a good point. I think there's a lot of that now in CTV, right, as a result of the different platforms that are utilised, or the different frameworks too. Yeah. What am I thinking of out of home there? Maybe both. Anyway, because the guidance for out of home came through too, and I think there was a requirement of a bigger lag time to work to be able to manage the discrepancies between different platforms. That was the one. Yeah. Right, Paul, I completely interrupted your answer there. Sorry.
No, that was it.
Excellent. Okay. So back to. You now, Tim, and I know we did talk about this a year ago, and it's an important topic. And actually in the survey around industry standards that we ran here locally, which I'll present some insights into shortly, this was a topic that kept coming up as, why is this still not as consistently adopted as required? So I'm going to get you to bang the drum again on the metadata capabilities and the data context that can be passed from sellers to buyers.
I'd love to. So yeah, to your point, to Cass's point, it was about a year ago I was sitting right here, sort of pontificating about this. I think the shorter answer, JJ, is it's hard, and I think there's a risk of oversimplifying this, and I'm guilty of that, as anybody might be. And there's a lot of moving pieces to this, in that, yes, those signals are important. I think it's, again, I repeat myself a lot. Apologies, everybody. Bridging that gap between linear and digital. I think giving buyers a slightly richer experience and sort of telemetry into what they're bidding upon. And I think there's a fear of price erosion and cherry picking, and I think that's a fair fear to have. It's you have a premium product that you need to be careful with, but then I suppose it's sort of meeting in the middle there of, it's sending those signals downstream, charging appropriately for them. And to Cass's point, I think there will be an appetite for it. And so, I mean, it's collaboration is the path forward. It's again repeating it. Buyers will pay for that premium inventory, especially when it's fairly labeled and looking at like a nutrition label.
Can I just say, on the buy side, we know that our clients will absolutely pay for what it's worth if we can prove out that it's going to meet business objectives.
Well, there we go. I was going to ask. So the amplification from the sales side with vendors and sellers is one thing, but then also the integrations from the DSPs and the buyers and the demand for it needs to be proven out. Are we plugging the two together well enough? Is the message getting through the pipes, as it were? Can I dumb that down anymore?
Thank you. It needs to be done. I'm the second smartest Tim on stage today, so it needs to be dumbed down. We're getting there. I think it's moving forward. It's slow. Like we were here a year ago, so I mean, like I've got an elephant in the room. It is slow, but I think progress is being made. I think as we move to unified auctions become more commonplace in the broadcast space. I think that sort of helps facilitate that. I'm not an eternal optimist, so that's sort of coming from me is that we are moving forward. Should say something.
Yeah, I think we'll seek more case studies on this, specifically from buyers, maybe both sets of vendors. I think it'd be interesting to actually pump this out a little bit more with any findings that we have. Now, in terms of signaling for server-side ad insertion, Cass. Why is that so important that there's improved signaling and through SSAI platforms?
Yeah, so again, I think it comes from a place where we haven't had standardization or a common protocol across the industry. So, the fact that we have now a new standard where we're helping the signals between media owners' technology and buyers' technology coordinate in a better way. And it will sort of allow us to know, regardless of what technology we use and regardless of what side we sit on, it tells us where that creative asset stitching needs to happen, whether that's on completely the server side or completely the client side, or, server side but with client side pixels, whatever it may be. There's a couple of really sort of important things that new signalling will give us. The first is around ad targeting, enhanced ad targeting. And I mean, everyone knows what ad targeting is, but the facilitation of more detailed information that it gives us between publisher and buyer around video content, around ad opportunities means that we will inherently get better targeting. That we're targeting the right ad to the right user at the right time, and that is great for everyone. The second important feature that this new field gives us is around seamless ad insertion. We know that users are most happy when there's no buffering, when ad insertion is as smooth as it can be. And facilitating the coordination between video players and ad servers means that we can precisely time and place ads. It means that transition between content and ad is more seamless, and that obviously creates a better user experience. The third feature around why it's important is really around ad verification and being able to have that robust measurement, knowing that the ad that we're delivering is delivering as intended, that it's delivering in a brand safe environment, and it combats potential fraud. And then lastly, going back to publishers as well, it enhances monetization opportunities. So better ad targeting, seamless ad insertion means that publishers can target more relevant ads to their users.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to labour on this sort of lost bus driver thing, and we're in this together because there has been some guidance that's come out in terms of definitions of particularly in-stream video or just video as a format. And then there's been a follow-up with OpenRTB 2.6. Now, Paul, you and I have recently been swapping a few notes, and I want you to be constructive and candid around the link, I suppose, between the protocols and the definitions of particularly in-stream. So what are some of the concerns that you have in terms of the adoption and the time of adoption and the evolution as we sort of adjust to some of these changes?
Yeah, so the timeline, I guess RTB 2.6 came out, was it early last year originally, and then we had the update that happened in March.
Yes.
Yeah, so when RTB 2.6 came out last year, I think that was the first time it had been updated in about 5 years. From 2016 was the last one? 2.5?
No,
Oh, that was when 2.5 first came out, right? It was 2016.
Yeah, no, there's sort of, I've been on 9 monthly chunks. I mean, a lot came out in this one, and they have changed the way that they're releasing them.
Yeah.
I think the problem that we had here was that the definitions for video came first, and then OpenRTB linked to them came after.
Yeah, so I guess where I was going with that is that so we had the video ad standards or the ad format updates that came out in August last year. Along with that came a redefinition of what a publisher should consider in-stream versus out-stream, which, from my perspective, I think has been a pretty clear definition for quite a long time. In-stream for me is simply when you are putting, it's advertising attached to a piece of content that the user is intending to view. Outstream has typically been a piece of advertising that is not necessarily attached to any content and usually found within the article or within a feed or some other location on the page. But the new definitions were basically any video that didn't have sound on by default should be considered outstream. That could be a video, like an ad or a video, that was previously in-stream, but because you didn't have sound on by default, it's now considered outstream. And
I don't know if it's considered.
Well, so it's
that's the problem.
It was that's the terminology that was being used in the update.
That's the assumption.
Yeah. So it's based on this video placement object in the RTB standards, right? And in RTB 2.5, which is why I was saying, released a few years ago, the video ad standards update refers to OpenRTB 2.5. It doesn't refer to 2.6, which is kind of where the challenge comes from. Because 2.5 refers to 5 different values that you can use to identify a piece of video advertising. One of those is in-stream. The other 4 are all other formats that aren't in-stream, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's what the definition was saying, that if it's in-stream, then you choose the first one. In-stream with sound on, then you choose the first one. If it's sound off, then you have to choose one of the other 4, which wasn't really accurate in my opinion. So then we had OpenRTB 2.6 and the latest update that came out in March, and in there is a new video placement object with new values in there, a new list of values, and it definitely goes a long way to resolving some of those concerns. It's more focused on, like, the values are I think one of them is in-stream, and then there's accompanying content, and then there's standalone.
Yes.
So it's more accurate reflection of where the video is placed on the page. So I guess the challenge is, as you said earlier, we've got a video ad standard that has been released, but it's referring to kind of an outdated RTB spec. So we almost need like another update to the video ad standards just to kind of bring them both align.
Yeah, so we reached out to Tech Lab on this, and they've been doing a lot of work in the US on this in terms of getting everyone up to speed. So we need to do a little bit of that here. They're happy to do a webinar in Australia once I get back off my holiday. But in a month or so, we'll work with the Video Council on this, because our concern is that you may be a publisher that has consumer considerations at heart, and therefore you have user-initiated videos in terms of sound. But they could, to a buyer, be worth lower in terms of yield, and therefore the bids will be lower, punishing the publisher based upon an outdated definition. That's essentially the commercial issue here, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and we absolutely agree that the different video advertising experiences are worth different values to the buyer. Click to play sound on is obviously has a different value proposition to buyers and to consumers than autoplay sound off. We don't disagree with that, but it's about how do we signal that to the buyer accurately, in relation to other things like your typical like outstream in article ads as well.
Yeah. So I've certainly seen the communication go out from sell-side vendors, Formatic included, quite rightly, to educate everyone on that. I'm actually less aware of what's happening buy-side with DSPs and the rest of it, but I think it's something to get across and get buyers and sellers aligned on pretty quickly. Anything to add to that? Actually, I wouldn't mind seeing if there's anyone out there that has anything to add to that, potentially by Slido. And I've just realised I completely forgot to update you all that the Slido link that we provided right at the beginning doesn't go to Slido at all. It goes off to the Ad Fraud Handbook. It's my bad, sorry, that I didn't tell you that about an hour ago. Apologies. It's now been updated. So those of you that have lost faith with Slido, keep the faith, go back. You can ask questions there. Just want to check on this one, though, because it hit me a little bit, and the more I dug into it, I got increasingly worried. So just if anyone's got a point to make it now. Otherwise, we'll be committing to further work to add to the load here, Gabe, but it's important. It's important. Thank you, Paul, and thank you for raising it and having the discussion. Now, Tim, we've talked a little bit about collaboration. I know you committed to it. Anything to add to that in terms of what we could do collaboratively in the coming months on this? Is it case studies, bit of research?
Yes to everything. I think Cass drove the point. Standardization where it makes sense. I think again it's an oversimplification to just say, hey, everybody standardize everything to do with your bid stream. Standardizing a lot would help, and so the content object taxonomy set by the IAB. I think adopting that makes sort of rollout infinitely easier in terms of both DSPs and the SSPs essentially dealing with those signals. Otherwise, no, not a terrible lot to add. I think largely the collaboration has been the underlying theme of today's discussion.
That taxonomy was updated 6 months ago to allow for even more information, actually, which would have happened after the session last year. But thank you. So, look, as a finish up before we see if anyone does have any questions, and we check on Slido, which I'd completely forgotten to update you all on. Sorry. What else is generally exciting you? It doesn't have to be about OpenRTB. This can be about anything in your professional or even personal lives. But the next 9 to 12 months from a product perspective would maybe be more relevant. What are you particularly excited about in terms of products in the next year or so? Anything?
So it probably wouldn't be an industry event without talking about generative AI. So I think generative AI in and of itself is exciting, but what I'm interested in and excited to see is how the media industry adapts to that. I personally think it's probably going to, I'm sure a lot of people would agree that it's probably one of the biggest disruptions the media industry will see has seen in quite a long time. And there's a lot of publishers out there who are looking at how they can adapt to that. And if you look at what Google's trying to do with their search, results and trying to integrate their AI into their search results, which could be, pretty scary for a lot of publishers out there, especially smaller publishers who are more at risk of that disruption. So I'm excited to see how publishers adapt to that and how they evolve. I think traditional media companies are at a point where they kind of do need to evolve as things like snackable video and generative AI, all these disruptions like new media, all these kind of concepts that have come to kind of an apex over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, I think is going to start hitting the industry more and more in the next couple of years. So I'm very excited to see how the industry both here and overseas adapts to that.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
From a client side or the buy side, I'm lucky enough to work at Adobe where we have technology that sit both on the marketing technology and the advertising technology side. And it's probably because it's a conversation that I've been having with our clients for the better part of a year and a half, 2 years. But probably one of the things that I'm most excited about is seeing those two ecosystems come together. So, you know, we talk about brands and we talk about cookieless, and we've done it to death, but it's really cool to sort of see brands leaning into that authenticated data space with their, you know, with their first party data, having the technologies to really activate unified profiles across brands' systems, whether that's sort of B2B, B2C systems, and really creating those profiles where we can activate rich customer experiences, you know, data peace of mind and actionable insights back into the advertising world. I think when we started talking about it 2 years ago, there were lots of questions, not really any answers. There's still a lot of questions, but we're a little bit further down the line. My head hurts a little bit less every conversation that I have about it, and I see that as really positive and exciting.
Fantastic. Mr. Pers, take us home.
Probably a couple things excite me. Nothing on the personal front. It's all work. So I'd say unified auctions or header bidding for CTV. We call it unified auctions because the pedantic people in the room know that there's no header in a CTV environment. I think you know, all ships rise with the tide, and you know, it's quite a tide that comes with a unified auction of a bid going out, you know, sort of in tandem with all of your demand sources, ensuring the highest bid wins every time. That, I think, also sort of facilitates a lot of what we've talked about here, which I think is justified for excitement. And I suppose a slightly lesser tangent would be just better ad targeting, which is something that Cass was talking about. Just, you know, I used to hear this, you know, fantastical story from a couple of years ago where there was a sort of a smart TV company that was able to sort of send a signal that the batteries were running low in the TV remote, which triggered some sort of audience segment for like a Duracell ad or something like that. I think stuff like that is cool. I'm cognizant there is a very fine line between sort of convenient and creepy in terms of being spied upon. And you know, hey, we've noticed you've got one sip left of your drink. Here's a Sprite ad. Sorry to keep hitting on Sprite. I don't mean to. Those would probably be it. It's just a more tailored ad experience. I want to see ads that are relevant to me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And just finding that balance.
And I think just on that as well, I was at the Ad Monsters Ops conference in New York a couple of weeks ago,
I love
and
those. They're great.
Google was there was someone from Google was talking there and has committed, you know, 100% they're killing the cookie, third-party cookie in the second half of 2024.
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
exciting, right?
It's out. It's public. We did a thing on it. Maybe you're away, but yep, it's good. And it's not, the can isn't being kicked down the road. The timeline's there. It's public on the Privacy Sandbox site. So it's time to get going on that one. I think to your point, Cass, sort of reiterating that, and maybe that's a topic with case studies for us to get back into in our next event in Melbourne.